Thank you everyone for joining us for our webcast today. I'm Dan Scorpio, head of M&A at H Advisors Abernathy in the United States. I'm joined by my colleague Sam Turvey, managing partner of H Advisors Maitland in London. And we are thrilled to have two special guests with us for this session who we've worked with for some time. Lauren Thomas, based in New York, and Ben Dummett, based in London at the Wall Street Journal. Both cover all things M&A, private equity, and breaking news for the Journal. And so we're really thrilled to have both of you here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So Lauren, I'll start with you. We've just spent some time talking about M&A transactions and how to communicate about deals that have a transatlantic and global focus. We'd love your perspective from the Wall Street Journal about how you look at M&A and how you in the paper cover M&A these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having us. So I think I can offer an interesting perspective, considering I'm also relatively new myself to the Journal. I started here in late 2022, so I've got a few months under my belt. So I have kind of been learning, of course, just how the Journal thinks about M&A, now that I'm on this team and covering, and hoping to cover some of the biggest deals in the industry. I think that in large part, of course, there are a lot of deals happening on any given week or month, though, of course, we're in a moment in time where maybe deal volumes have slowed a bit. But I think at the Journal, we're looking to cover, the most transformative deals, and whether that's in terms of value or size. I think that's one metric that we're always thinking about, but oftentimes as well, like the companies involved and in what sector, and kind of getting at the bigger story underneath the deal and just what it's going to mean longer term. So yeah, I think that's how we think about it day to day, because again, at any given week, we can hear of many different things, big and small, in terms of size. But at the Journal, I think our team is always looking to break the bigger, more transformative deals, and so I think that drives our coverage in large part.
And Ben, this is for you as well, both you and Lauren. From where you sit, what are you seeing in M&A these days? Certainly, both of you are very well connected. What does the market look like today?
Well, I think it looks a little shaky. I mean, this past week we saw some deals, particularly in the U.S. For example, the Qualtrics Silver Lake deal, et cetera. And then I noticed today there was a deal involving Mint, the mobile operator that was bought by T-Mobile. But I would say, comparatively speaking, its volumes are down, and everyone knows the difficulties we've had leading up to this point, and today things seem to be actually getting worse on the heels of this SVB collapse. Credit Suisse, First Boston, big European bank, systematically important bank, its stock is cratering now, and that's sending shockwaves throughout the market. So I think that we're living in a time of extreme turbulence, and I don't think that is good for M&A. I mean, it's going to be, I was meeting with some at a big American bank yesterday, and they were just saying that things were starting to turn around. The leverage markets were starting to open. Banks are showing a greater willingness to lend money, to fund deals. And then you have SVB yesterday, and today you have Credit Suisse. So I don't think that's a very good recipe for M&A outlook, for the M&A outlook, at least over the short term. When I say over the next few weeks, I mean, generally going into this year, there was a view that overall volumes would really pick up. We'd see a big pickup in the second half of the year, and I certainly believe that generalization holds true today, even more so given the recent upheaval in the markets that we've seen.
Yeah, Ben, can I just jump in and ask you a question? It's a little bit UK specific, actually, but I mean, you know, there's a lot of talk about UK companies, particularly private, publicly listed companies here, PLCs, that are undervalued, and that generates quite a lot of interest from particularly US PE, you know, looking to sort of take advantage of the situation, doing take privates, and there's been all sorts of kind of local domestic media talking about that from a kind of thematic and trend perspective. You know, there was a sense a little bit that the market was starting to come back in the UK, and that we were going to see a larger deal flow, particularly in sort of smaller and mid-cap size companies. Do you think SVB has kind of knocked the wind out of that again, or do you think that the UK is still sort of structurally undervalued and, you know, remains really high on that PE sort of wish list?
I think it's, I guess, high on the wish list, but with SVB and I think now Credit Suisse, which is really adding to the uncertainty, I think it's going to be that much harder. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about UK's on for sale, you know, because evaluations are relatively low, because the currency is cheap versus what the US dollar. But, you know, one of the stumbling blocks has always been the ability of the buyer and the seller to agree on price. And when you have a situation, I mean, obviously as a seller, especially in the UK, if you feel that you're undervalued unfairly, you know, it's due to some idiosyncratic reason that's resulted in this, then you know you're going to be reluctant to sell anytime soon. And so I think that it's going to be increasingly difficult to find a clearing price. I mean, without getting into names, there are examples out in the market today of US PE firms looking to buy UK listed companies, and you know PE firm is started with the first bid, the second bid, the third bid, they're into the fourth bid, and they still haven't reached an agreement. So that just speaks to the challenges of the buyers and sellers reaching some sort of clearing price. And I just reiterate, with this renewed volatility, to me, that's just going to make it harder. It's going to make it harder in terms of finding clearing price, and again, it's going to make it harder for the financing markets to reopen. I mean, again, I was just talking to a banker today, and he essentially said that what's gone on just today is very discouraging in terms of the financing markets reopening.
Yeah. Can I just change tack slightly? And I'm kind of interested in that because you made the point, you know, we were talking a little about the dynamics of the sort of US and UK or US, Europe, you know, sort of global markets really in transatlantic. But how do you as a team work together? Because you're kind of sitting a little bit on two sides of that. What are the dynamics in terms of working together when you're sort of chasing a story, or, you know, you think there's an opportunity and it might involve you know, it might involve a firm that's US based, and the target might be in Europe, in France, in Germany, something like that. How do you work together to sort of bring that story together at the Journal? Lauren, maybe you could go first. Maybe.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was just going to say, I think I've sent Ben a number of messages, even just this week, and you know, we're not that far into the week, about various things that I have heard here and, you know, picked up on, I guess, within my world of sources or people that I talk to, that I feel as if he would be able to kind of add value to that, or maybe get us further along in the process, and knowing the relationships that he has in Europe. So I think it happens a lot, you know, whether it's within the world of retail and consumer, or you know, there are just a lot of companies that, you know, have a presence around the globe, right? And so I think, you know, as a result, there are many situations in which, you know, I'm picking up on things and will often just kind of pass along, you know, what I'm hearing to Ben, and then he's able to kind of circulate that within his world. So yeah, I think, and just, we're a very small team here at the Journal, you know, covering M&A. So we kind of always have a good sense, I think, of who knows who, and we're able to work as a stronger unit as a result.
Lauren, that leads to the next question that I want to ask you, and I'm curious both for your perspective and for Ben's on this. Our previous panel spent some time talking about leaks in M&A, and our team does a lot of research into kind of when deals leak and how often and where they come from and what level of detail is in that. I'm curious, and I won't ask you to give away any secret sauce for the journal, but I think our audience would be curious to hear a little bit about how you hear something, whether it's a rumor or something you really believe is true. How do you then take that and decide what's worth following up on, what's just chatter, to eventually get something that you and your editors feel comfortable in publishing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think like the overarching thing for me is because I've already been kind of surprised in a few instances, honestly, and we'll get into specifics of I pick up on things or I hear something and I, in my head, am kind of quickly like counting it out, like, no way, like that can't be true, like there's no way. And then, lo and behold, a few weeks later, like, or maybe even a few days later, like there turns out to be some truth to that. So I guess to me, that's been like a lesson learned in that, like, maybe with everything, like you need to at least like, really think about it. Like, could there be something there? Because I've already been surprised in a few instances where, things that I want to call off as just without not being in the realm of possibility, there ends up being some truth to it. So that's all to say, I mean, I think that when I pick up on things, I think, okay, like who, first I'm thinking, all right, who would be able to maybe validate this, or who would have some sort of sense of whether or not this is real, and then I'm trying to bring it to the right people, I guess, to suss it out. But yeah, I mean, I think like my answer, and Ben, I'm curious your thoughts, but I think you have to kind of give some thought to everything, I guess, in a sense. I mean, certainly there's, I'm sure I could think of bizarre situations that maybe would never make sense. But for the most part, I feel like it's worth asking around. But again, I think here at the Journal, like we keep a lot of stuff close, like we're not casting these wide nets, especially on some of this stuff that is maybe harder to wrap your head around, because we don't want to like spread, in a way, kind of create this echo chamber of tips, or leaks, as you put it. So, but Ben, I'm curious if you think this, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, I mean, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I mean, for me, the hardest part of the job is I've just found over time, one of the hardest and actually one of the worst parts of the job is this trend by individuals, I don't know who they are, who, you try to use M&A reporters to spread rumors and, create this echo chamber that Lauren referred to. And, the way they do that is they send out anonymous tips, and and what they do is they tend to give all sorts of detail about a bid, about the advisors involved. That can be the banks, the lawyers, the PR firms. And, for me, that's the biggest challenge, is deciding whether or not to take this tip seriously and go around and try to chase it, because by doing so, you risk creating the situation where you help someone maybe prosper or benefit from a stock, the leaking out in a wide basis and the stock going up as a result. And I don't want to be party to that. So for me, that's the most challenging thing. And I have to admit, as a result of that trend, I find myself discounting things that maybe I wouldn't discount, and sometimes that turns out to be the wrong decision on my part. So, I mean, for me, that's I guess that's part of the job, right? But I try to approach the job with the idea that, you know, I want to be respected and be someone who's trustworthy, considered trustworthy. I want to work with people that are trustworthy. You know, we're trying to achieve a goal. You know, we're trying to do something here, and I don't want to use people, and I don't want to be used. But I find that in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, even pre-COVID, this idea of these tipsters they've really become much more widespread. So
yeah, with social, I feel like with social media too, like just you know, I get messages like Ben, I'm sure you do as well, through many different mediums. So yeah, I definitely do think that that's amplified. So there's a lot more to sift through.
I suppose in a time of volatility, in a way, you know, people are looking to get into a position of advantage from it all, and yeah, it must make your job much harder from that perspective, trying to sort of sift through the quality and those that are just there to further their own gain. It's really interesting. I mean, another word that sort of springs to mind when you talk about trust, Ben, was is regulation. And you know, we were talking on our prior panel about, you know, Europe is a pretty highly regulated place, generally speaking, but it's also quite fragmented. You know, how do you navigate around those different regulatory landscapes that you've got in Europe? And, you know, in the UK, for example, we have the takeover panel and the takeover code, and, you know, it's quite different to what there is in the US and certain parts of Europe. I mean, what does it all sort of mean to you, and sort of how you go about doing your job? How do you navigate around it, or does it not really change the dynamic very much?
Well, yeah, generally, I would say as a general rule in Europe, I mean, the UK for certain, but in many other jurisdictions in Europe, the regulators take a much more proactive role in requiring companies to disclose or confirm any rumors are out there if it's moving their stock. So that can be helpful in either. Well, mostly for me, it's helpful in, as a way of deciding whether or not to chase something or not. Because if there's a rumor that's been published by a publication, and the stock responds to that, then, for example, in the UK, the CMA will most definitely require either one or both of the parties to issue a release if it is true. So if there's no release within about 4 or 5 hours of the story being published, then I know that it's a non-event and I can put it to bed. I don't have to worry about that. Sadly, if a story comes out and the CMA's required the companies to confirm if it's true, and they do confirm it, well, that just means I got beat. So I have to confirm, I have to chase it, and I've already been beaten. So it's not the greatest of times for me.
Yeah, fair. What about Lauren? I mean, Ben talks about getting beaten. I mean, is that something, you know, the competitive landscape of reporters covering M&A these days, is that really foremost in your mind, that you know, coming first on the story is absolutely the number one objective, or is it the kind of long tail to a story and you know, how that could turn into a thematic piece or a trend, or how does it work to you? I mean, do you wake up every day and it's win win win? You know, what's that like?
Yeah, I do think to have this job, you have to have an element of that mentality, I guess, you know, to an extent. At least, you know, certainly not going overboard with it, but no, for sure. I mean, we're all conscious of it, and kind of to my point earlier with social media, it's been so interesting for me just to talk to people that had this job maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, even, just about how different it was. And nowadays, when you have platforms like Twitter, I mean, a lot of times, you know, I don't think that we do this here at the Journal, but you'll see other reporters at other platforms, you know, just make a quick tweet or a post even, and kind of getting out whatever intel it is that they have on a deal or a situation. So the speed at which information, I guess, can be communicated now, like it's just so much quicker. And like as a result, like I think when we have something and we know we're gonna run with it or whatever, there's definitely more pressure, I think, now just to get it up, get it out faster, because like you don't know, your competitors can kind of come at you from all of these different angles now, not even just necessarily like a story to match you. So I think the one thing though that I'm learning here at the Journal as well is that we do like we often aren't writing necessarily the play-by-play along the whole process, where maybe others will cover, when advisors, come into the mix, or just these more intermediary points along the way. I think that we oftentimes are just trying to kind of get the story at the finish line, or the 5-yard line, very close to there being a deal. And so I think there are key points that we're thinking about that are further along in the process that kind of help like guide our reporting and allow us to know, like, all right, when do we want to strike? And in that way, like, it takes some of the pressure off, I guess, as we're not as stressed about keeping up with all of the the other stuff that might leak out along the way. But no, it's certainly something that I know I'm conscious of, and definitely like to keep a pulse on my my rivals and what they're up to, for sure.
Very wise. Always keep an eye on your rivals, and I think I know who you're referring to in some of them. Dan, I think you wanted to ask something. Yeah.
And how do both of you look at, you're getting close to reporting something, you feel like you have it right? How do you gauge if you want, and are you persuaded by a company saying, can we hold this for a few days, or can we work together on a story and set a different time, rather than you going ahead and publishing right now? Are you open to that? And how do you make those decisions? I know our audience will be very interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, I can start with that one if you want. And so, yeah, I think that that's always something, it comes up a lot. Like, I know it's come up with me again, in just the few months that I've been here so far. But I know it's a very delicate dance, for sure. I mean, if we're in a position in which we're already, we have all the sourcing, we've kind of checked the boxes and we have enough to go with something, and we don't necessarily need to wait on the company, I think then you have to think even more about it. Like, okay, what value would that add? Like, what would be the reasoning, I guess, to hold off? Because again, just to go back to your previous question, there's always that risk of if you hold off for too long, does someone else kind of swoop in? For example, say I strike a deal with a company and say, all right, like, we'll work with you so that we can maybe get this other detail, or speak to the CEO, or, whatever it might be. So there's some value add there. And then we're discussing timeline and the time in which we'll run a story. Well, there's always that risk that another rival reporter could kind of swoop in and just report out whatever they have, when we're kind of sitting back and because we've promised to work with the company. So I think it can be tricky, for sure, is what I've learned. But I like, it always comes up, not always, but it comes up a lot. And I think there are reasons to want to work with companies, for sure. But I just think that the company always has to understand, and a lot of them do, like the situation that we're in. And oftentimes you'll kind of discuss, all right, well, if you guys catch wind that someone else is going to report this out before us, then, you have to give us the green light and understand that we're going to want to go. So, but it's tough. It's a lot of like negotiating. I feel like that's another skill you have to have in this job, is being good and tough sometimes negotiator.
Ben, how about you?
Well, I mean, I sort of share a lot of those thoughts. I mean, I guess, personally, I'm open to it. I'm open to working with people. Like I say, it's all about trust. I want to try and get the best story out there that I can, the most accurate story I can. And, but at the same time, I don't want to, I don't want to get beat. I mean, if I'm approaching a company with the idea that I can get this out first, then that's my goal, right? So, yeah, you know, generally speaking, for me anyway, I approach it as sort of like M&A is like a two-way street. I mean, you know, both parties have to work together. You know, it's not always in everyone's interest, but you know, hopefully in those situations where it is in people's interest, and you know, I'm open and I'm keen to work with people. You know, I'm keen to work with people as long as you know we're protected. You know, as Lauren pointed out, you know, someone else approaches the company in the interim, that we would sort of have the ability or the freedom to maybe publish quickly, and they would work with us. But yeah, I think that I really don't have any problem. I'm definitely open to that, if you know, as long as the ground rules are all set and everyone agrees with them. I think that's fine.
The flip side to that is, you know, of course, could be situations, and are situations, where you may not be on the chase of something, but for example, I call you, Lauren, and say, I have maybe news tomorrow that I think you'll be interested in. Let's work together. How do you balance knowing that I'm calling you for a reason and we both want something out of this? How does that calculus work in your mind to actually decide, yes, let's work on this and let's go forward on this plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think, well, like I love those phone calls because often that means like, all right, you know, something could be coming that I haven't yet, you know, figured out, or didn't really, you know, I maybe wasn't on top of it because I wasn't preparing for this thing tomorrow. So that, you know, that can be exciting for sure. But I do think like we are always, you know, and a lot of it is me having a conversation with my editor, maybe after we have that initial phone call, to kind of figure out like, all right, do we want to, you know, agree to this? I mean, I think in that first conversation with you, I'd probably try to get as much information as I could, kind of at a higher level, like whatever you're willing to share, just to get a sense, you know, again, at the highest level, like, okay, is this something that we're really interested in? And I think the hope is that like you and I, as we do, like we already have a great relationship, and so you kind of know the stories that I'm covering. So I would already be kind of assuming like, all right, you're coming to me probably for something that you think like I would be interested in, like knowing what I've covered in the past. And so I think that that's really helpful too. Obviously, just having, you know, me having those longstanding relationships with people like yourself. But yeah, I think that we try to think about it, and like, you know, I'm sure we've been through this before, like before we totally lock in and say, all right, this is something we want to work with you on, just again think through like, all right, do we know what this is, like do we have any sense of what this could be? But yeah, you know, if we don't, then usually, you know, it's in our best interest, I guess, to work with you on something, especially if again, like I said, we know it's going to be something that the journal would care about and want to write about. I think it all just goes back to like, hopefully, like you having an understanding of the stories that we write, again, because like I was saying earlier, we don't necessarily write, you know, in activism, I think is a great example. You know, we like to cover kind of these key moments in activist campaigns, or if a settlement's reached, and not necessarily always covering the stuff along the way. So just knowing, again, when those key moments are, when we're going to strike, so to speak.
And to that question of what the journal cares about, Ben, is it a transaction value metric? Is it the size or profile of a private equity firm, if a PE firm is involved, or is it something more qualitative than that? How do you make those decisions?
I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, just on Lauren's point, I mean, just speaking for myself, I would, and to your audience, I mean, never hesitate to call me with anything. You know what I mean? I can't guarantee that we will be interested, but I would never want you to presume that I don't want to hear from you. So just first of all. Second of all, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, on a basic level, sure, the bigger the deal, the more interesting. But that said, I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal, I mean, things that are consumer facing, that are that subject matter that ties into a theme is something, sort of thematic is something that the journals know. So things like healthcare. Obviously a lot of big deals are a lot of big deals are in the healthcare sector, but healthcare is an important thing. It touches everybody. So it might not be the biggest deal, but if it's kind of an interesting thing, if let's say it's dealing with Alzheimer's or something like that, or there's an interesting investor, an investor that you wouldn't typically characterize with, investing in this thing or buying, company X, that can be interesting even if it's small. I mean, to give you an example, I mean, we broke a little story about, or this is just me, and we broke a little story a while ago about Electrify America, which is a big recharging operator in the US. And, VW which owns that, was bringing in an investor, Siemens. And, it was a small deal, right? Like, I think it was like a $2 billion valuation. So, but the investment was only about 100 million. But to me, that's interesting, right? Because the electrification EV world is an exciting world. It's part of this energy transition world. So that played heavily in any kind of, in my interest in trying to pursue that kind of story. So, it just, anything to do with consumers we love, technology touches everyone. So again, I don't think it's cut and dry. I mean, on a very simple level, the bigger the deal, if you come to me $100 billion deals, it could be about anything, and I'll take it, right? But if it's, it can be like a $500 million deal, but I don't know if it's some brand that everybody knows. Oh, that could be very interesting, right? Or it's something to do with metals that go into batteries, or for EVs. That's a big deal, right? So, or it's some interesting investor, like, I mean, it's Elon Musk investing in like candy bars or something like that. I only bring that up as a goofy example, but it's sort of like if there's an interesting investor that people know about and they're doing something that you would never attach them to this deal or anything like that, that to me, that's very interesting. I think the journal would go for that personally.
Yeah, Ben, I think that's really interesting, and maybe you're right about Elon Musk and candy bars. It's quite, it seems entirely possible to me.
You never know. You never know. I mean, expect the unexpected from Elon.
Exactly. He'll tell us on Twitter first. But yeah, I mean, look, I just sort of had one. I don't know, maybe Dan, if you want to finish after me, but I was kind of interested in how communications teams and how PR firms can be of most use to you, and how can they be? I guess what are the best and the worst things that they do? Because I think at the end of the day, there's advisors talking, and there's a lot of planning and preparation. Then it comes down to sort of this is happening and this is the moment, and the phone call comes in, and I'm sure you see lots of examples of great comms and PR, and you see lots of examples of really terrible stuff. What are the kind of main things that you find valuable to keep it relatively positive from those kind of interactions?
I think for me, and this is kind of like, maybe it's a no-brainer, but I've found that, sometimes when I meet folks in the industry, they're not always very direct about what exactly they work on, specific clients. And I think at the end of the day, like, I just like to, as I'm staying organized, if I am thinking about, you, Sam, or you, Dan, just having like a really clear sense of, and even if it's down to the PE firm or down to the, the corporate client that you're working with. So I can keep that kind of all straight in my head. So when situations do arise, like, I know exactly who to go to. Again, I don't know if sometimes that's kind of a legality, or you're not exactly able to divulge details on who exactly you're working with at any given moment in time. But I think, like, as being as transparent as you can be about the situations that you've done in the past and you're working on today, that is just super helpful for me, especially as I'm meeting people. So yeah, as these things do arise, I know exactly who to go to on it.
Well, I guess Really, I mean, it's a pretty simple thing. I mean, I just want people, first of all, to engage with me. Like, you know, and I mean, like, pick up the phone if I'm calling, or answer my email. Even if you're not going to help me, or I can't talk to you,
Yes.
can't talk to me. I find that a lot of communication people, they don't respond. You know, they don't respond in a timely fashion. So, I mean, even I recognize that a lot of times people aren't going to be willing to help me. They're not, or you know, or allowed to help me, or what. But you know, communications means to actually talk to people, right? So I mean, if you can look at, you know, Ben. I mean, I find that even if you can emphasize, well, Ben, listen, I'd love to help you out, but I can't, you know, or something like this, you know, then I find that goes a long way in terms of trying to build a rapport. You know what I mean? I mean, if there's one piece of advice, and I'm sure you could give me all sorts of advice, but there's one piece of advice I could give communications people. It's never get on the phone with me and say, I come to you a question, you know, I understand this. Can you comment? We declined the comment off the record. I mean, that to me is it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You know, I declined, it's off the record, but we declined the comment. I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know about Lauren. I can't say. I've met plenty of journalists, and I can, just in our newsroom, someone will get off the phone and they'll have that comment. No comment, off the record. And it just sends everyone epileptic. I mean, they get off the phone and they go crazy. Sorry, I'm kidding. But honestly, that's something that really I find, maybe you have to say that, but I really don't get it. So if you don't have to say it, at least when you're talking to me, I'd urge you not to.
Sage counsel for our listeners. Sorry.
And we'll have to leave it there, though we could talk about this all day, I'm sure. Lauren and Ben, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to reading you. Talk to you soon.